In today's video, we're back with some updated NHL trade rumors, and today we're talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Buffalo Sabres, and the Vancouver Canucks, as well as the Vegas Golden Knights and Nikita Gusev. Where might he end up? We'll get into all the latest coming up next. Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some more updated NHL trade rumors. Some of the stuff we've been kind of touching on briefly on and off here the last few days, but more information is continuously emerging on some of these teams as they're required to make moves here based on the salary cap, and there's all kinds of speculation. And really, I think the RFA market is the biggest thing holding up the trade market. Some of the trades we've seen in the last few days have really fueled more speculation about other moves they're going to be taking, especially with the Buffalo Sabres. With the trade that we saw between the Sabres and the Blackhawks sending Nylander to Chicago in return for Henri Jokiharju, it certainly fueled a lot of speculation that Rasmus Ristolainen is going to be on his way out the door. I came across some articles today on a couple different sources here, which I'll link down in the description, which kind of speculate on some different moves that the Sabres might be making. Now, of course, these are more their ideas on where the Sabres should be going to talk to and what kind of deals they could be looking at. But here's a couple ideas for some trades for Ristolainen to let your opinion on based on these articles. So leave some comments down below. Let me know which ones of these you think might make the most sense, and also which ones you would do if you were Jason Botterill, GM of the Sabres. Now, first up, they recommend talking to the Winnipeg Jets, who we know are really depleted on the blue line. They've lost Tyler Myers. They've lost Ben Sherratt. They really could use some extra help on that blue line, and Ristolainen very well might be a good fit back there. And obviously, the Sabres would want, ideally, somebody who can play center ice. Now, when you look at the Jets center ice position, it's not the most ideal. Obviously, their top center iceman, Mark Scheifele, is not going anywhere. But they could look to a couple other options. They could consider Brian Little, but Brian Little does have a form of a no-trade clause, and that very well might prove difficult. It may not work out, although he might be the kind of player that they're looking for. But I think the more likely response here would be to take a look at Jack Roslovic, perhaps, or even Matthew Perreault as a complementary piece, depending on if the Jets needed to include one or more pieces. Then it could be a bigger package deal with multiple players going from either side. Obviously, like I said, with Roslovic and Perreault maybe being a package that the Jets might be willing to move here. And the Jets also have some pieces that might interest Buffalo. If it's not a center iceman, maybe they'd want to consider moving Nikolai Ehlers, who we've talked about before. Obviously, Ehlers has a pretty good contract for what he can bring, but has really failed to contribute in the playoffs, and that time has been very streaky over the last year or two. I know there's been some talk around him here as well. So obviously, I'm not sure if we'd see the Sabres and the Jets hook up on another trade or not, but I think there are some pieces in Winnipeg that might interest Buffalo, and they clearly have a major need for a player like Ristolainen. Now, this article also suggests the Sabres and the Oilers possibly hook up for a trade, and this one could be a one-for-one deal if both parties would agree to it. That would be sending Ristolainen to Edmonton for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Now, obviously, Nugent-Hopkins is clearly the third best forward in Edmonton. And considering what the Oilers have been through, I'm not real sure that they're going to be keen on trading Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. I know that about a year or two ago, there was a lot more talk that he very well might be a player who could actually bring back some value to upgrade other areas of the club. And obviously, this article kind of suggests taking the pressure off some of the younger defensemen, like an Evan Bouchard, who is expected to more likely play more at the NHL level this year. He could be a future power play quarterback, but having a guy like Ristolainen there would kind of take the pressure off of him being a right shot defenseman, where he could play a bigger role, more minutes, and that kind of thing. But I'm not real sure how the Oilers would feel about that. If you're an Oilers fan especially, would you trade Ryan Nugent-Hopkins for Rasmus Ristolainen? I think if you're Buffalo, you probably do that deal all day long. Not sure, though, if you're Edmonton, that you do go ahead and do that. The Oilers could use an upgrade in that area as well, so it does make sense, but to trade Nugent-Hopkins when you don't really have a ton of valuable forwards might not be the best move. Yeah, I'd probably hold off here and maybe try to go about fixing my blue line a different way. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Now, the other day, we'd also mentioned the possibility of trading Ristolainen to Nashville in exchange for center Kyle Turris. Now, there seemed to be a mixed reaction in the comment section of that video. Many Sabres fans not really being real keen on Kyle Turris. But I would say this, he's making $6 million per year, and based on how he played prior to last year, I don't really think it's a bad contract. He also played really well at the World Championship tournament in the springtime, so really I think Turris has the ability to bounce back. He may not be the exact player you had in mind, but overall I think he could take the pressure off Casey Middlestat and bring a pretty solid number 2 center, which is really what he's been for a big chunk of his career. Obviously, if he remains in Nashville, he's not going to be that, and they're going to have a very expensive group of center icemen, and they might want to upgrade other areas of the team. After trading PK Subban and that $9 million contract, If they swap Turris for Ristolainen in Nashville, obviously there is a bit of a difference in their cap hits, but maybe they retain a little bit on Turris to make it pretty even. And perhaps we get a one-for-one deal, and Nashville gets a little bit more cost certainty with a cheaper right-shot defenseman on their blue line to replace BK. At the same time, they do have Dante Fabro, so it might not be the perfect deal for Nashville, but still, the Sabres need a center iceman. I think Turris could be the right player for them, possibly, and at the same time, obviously, we know Nashville would probably love to move that contract. So, again, let me know what your thoughts are on that trade, and we'll see where we go if we end up getting a trade for the Buffalo Sabres. But I really don't think Jason Botterill is done here. All these articles kind of seem to insinuate that the bigger trade is coming, that this small trade we've seen with the Blackhawks is only the start, and we're going to have a bigger one coming here where they really make some more major upgrades. Now, the Sabres could also use themselves an upgrade in goal. Last year's tandem of Carter Hutton and Linus Ullmark didn't really do the greatest, and there is some talk that they might be looking for an upgrade in that regards, but that might prove to be more difficult. There's really not much in the way on the free agent market that they could really look to. The main goaltender that's really had any speculation surrounding him about being traded would be Jonathan Quick in Los Angeles, which I know right now seems a little bit unlikely given his age and his injury history and his contract, but he does lack no trade protection, so obviously trading him is not difficult from that perspective. And really, but if you think about the fact of what he's accomplished in his career, the contract really isn't all that bad if he can bounce back and kind of regain his form and stay healthy, which would be the big question. So would Buffalo consider, maybe making some sort of package deal with the Los Angeles Kings? I guess that it might be possible. Instead of upgrading the center position, maybe they look to be a goaltending position. I'm not really sure if that's a possibility or not, but I know that that's the other area that the Sabres, I think, would like to upgrade with, but it's certainly a little bit more challenging and more difficult to pull that off. Now, as I mentioned, I want to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins as well, who are really tight on cap space and still have some restricted free agents to sign, including defenseman Marcus Pettersson and forward Zach Aston-Reese and Teddy Bluger. Getting all these guys signed and staying under the cap is going to prove to be kind of difficult here. And we've talked about the Penguins kind of off and on here a little bit. And I do think they're going to make some other moves to shed some salary. And one of the players I feel is likely to be traded would be Nick Bjugstad. I did see some rumors linking Pittsburgh and Vegas, but personally, I don't really think they make sense for Vegas to do this. But let me know what you think, if they can maybe make other moves that kind of change their cap situation a little bit. But essentially, the trade rumor that's going around that I've seen online here is Nick Bjugstad going to Vegas for Nikita Gusev, which really I think would be a bit of a steal for Pittsburgh. But at the same time, cap-wise would be pretty even. Obviously, Bjugstad's making just over $4 million. Gusev's looking for about $4 million. But really, would Vegas make that trade? I don't think so, because if they were willing to pay Gusev the $4 million, I think they'd probably would rather keep him than have Bjugstad, in my opinion. But they're rumored to be offering him $2 million. So I don't really think they can afford to take on $4 million without making other moves. That just makes their cap situation that much more complicated and difficult to work with. So I really don't see that happening. So I know there's been some talk about that I've seen in different places online, but that to me just doesn't make sense. But I do see Nick Bjugstad being a very likely trade candidate for the Penguins. Another option that does exist that I've seen some articles on as well would be maybe trading Casey DeSmith, who does have some value. It's been a pretty decent backup goaltender, and maybe they bring up Tristan Jarry here to replace him. They would save about $600K in salary cap space that way. Obviously, DeSmith has signed at around $1.2 million for the next 3 years. Tristan Jarry's also kind of stuck in a situation where he might be stuck in the minors behind youngsters like Murray and DeSmith, who are not very old and likely not going anywhere anytime soon unless they do trade one of them. So, I've speculated before that maybe they would trade Tristan Jarry. That's a possibility. But I do think between DeSmith and Jarry, one of them could very well go. Obviously, they also brought in Dustin Tokarski as well from the Charlotte Checkers to be part of their American Hockey League affiliate down in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. So there's that extra goaltenders in the mix as well. So it's really hard to say how the Penguins proceed here. But there's a variety of things they can do. Trading one of their goaltenders I do think is a real possibility. And moving Nick Bjugstad's also a real possibility, because I don't see them wanting to give up on any of their RFAs that remain unsigned here. But they very well could be creative, making a minor deal here, get them signed. And they do have a player or two they could put as non-roster or down in the minors. They kind of bury a little bit of salary as well. So we'll see what happens, but I do expect to see some moves out of the Penguins over the short term. Now, I want to touch on the Vancouver Vancouver Canucks and Louis Eriksson here as well. There's been some updates between JP Barry, his agent, and Jim Benning. Apparently they have spoken, as well as the player, Louis Eriksson himself, talking to Jim Benning as well about the situation. Of course, we saw earlier in the offseason the comments from a Swedish media outlet, and essentially his agent says that the comments were kind of blown out of proportion, but at the same time, they did have some discussions to kind of figure out what's best for the future and how to move past this or resolve it or whatnot. And even JP Barry said he feels that it very well might be in the best interest of all parties that Louis Eriksson move on and play elsewhere next season. Now, of course, they'd have to find a trade for him. He's got a $6 million cap hit, which is going to prove difficult based on his performance. But one thing that I didn't realize until today that might prove to be make things a little bit easier is that over the next 3 years of the contract, he's actually only owed $8 million. A big chunk of his contract's already been paid out. So even though the cap hit is big, the actual financial obligation really isn't. So if they can find a way for him to waive his no-trade clause and trade him to a team that's either trying to get to the cap floor or has all kinds of space and could really take like a sweetener or something to that effect, then that very well might prove doable after all. I mean, Vancouver's kind of loaded up on a lot of players that they've signed here. They have more than enough guys that they could easily add a younger player into that as a sweetener to move Eriksson if a team is willing to do that, or they also have the possibility of adding a draft pick or something as well. Of course, we already seen them lose their first round pick in next year's draft in the JT Miller deal, so they're not going to want to give up a first rounder, probably not a second rounder next year, but they could look at adding either a later round pick or maybe something in 2021 or future down the road. I'm not sure, but it might prove a little easier than many have thought to trade Eriksson after all. Instead of taking a contract back like a Milan Lucic or like a James Neal in Calgary or anything to that effect, they very well might go a different route here if they can talk to some of the teams that have the space and see if they can work out a deal. But of course, they're also hung by the fact that Eriksson has a no-trade clause and can really dictate his future. Of course, they also have the ability to put him through waivers when the season starts, bury him in the minors, but that way they're only going to get cap relief of just over $1 million. I mean, it's still a savings and they can do that, but at the same time, it's not nearly as much as getting rid of the contract altogether. Even if they have to retain a portion of it, still nothing like doing that at all. So I guess we'll see how the Canucks proceed. But with all the moves that the Canucks have made, as we talked about a little bit in the last day or two here, they signed Michael Furlan. They've got a lot of guys now that really need to move on to shed some cap space, and there's lots of talk about how they might go about that. So I guess we'll stay tuned here, but I just want to bring that information on Louis Eriksson's contract, and it might actually prove to be a little easier than many people thought to actually get him off the books. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I'll keep you all up to date with all the breaking news from around all the NHL teams. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.